The warm rays of the September sun shone through the blinds, creating patterned shadows on the walls of the cozy bedroom. Emily Harris was awake, though the clock showed only 6 in the morning. She was always an early bird, unlike her husband Jason, who was peacefully sleeping on the opposite side of the bed. Emily stood up carefully, careful not to disturb her spouse's sleep. Her movements were like clockwork, the result of years of hiding and smoothing, of being inconspicuous even in her own home. With an easy gait, she made her way to the bathroom, where she spent almost an hour carefully grooming herself. Long blonde hair, impeccable makeup, a strict but elegant blouse and pencil skirt. The Lakeview librarian's look was perfected. She stood in front of the mirror for a moment, gazing into her own reflection. Few people in the small town knew that 35 years ago, it was Eric, not Emily, who had come into the world. The transgender transition had begun before she'd met Jason, but it was to him she'd chosen to reveal herself, believing his promises of unconditional support. She covered the thin scar on her chin, the only visible reminder of her past, with her fingers. Lakeview had been a refuge for Emily. The small town in Oregon, where she'd worked in the library for the 7th year, was where she'd finally felt real. The locals saw her as a modest, intelligent woman with a passion for classic literature and organizing cultural events. No one questioned her femininity, no one asked uncomfortable questions. Jason had shown up at the library 4 years ago, a successful attorney from the neighboring, larger town of Riverdale, where he commuted to work every day. Elegant, charming, with attentive gray eyes and a disposing smile. He was looking for materials for one of his cases, and captivated Emily with his erudition and manners of a real gentleman. Their romance developed rapidly. 6 months later, she bore his last name, and a year later they bought this house on quiet Maple Street. Walking down to the kitchen, Emily thought back to their first few months together. At the time, she'd thought she'd caught a lucky break. Jason had known about her past from the beginning. She'd decided to be honest, and he'd said, to her surprise and delight, that it didn't matter. "You're a woman, Emily, a woman I've come to love. The rest is just details." As she made coffee, strong for herself and medium strength for her husband, she thought about how their relationship had changed over the past year. Jason's promotion to partner at the firm had brought not only increased wealth, but also more frequent trips to the county. At first, she'd been pleased with his success, but gradually she'd begun to notice a change. The aloofness, the irritability, the late returns, the strange phone conversations he cut off when she appeared. And that smell, the foreign perfume she sometimes picked up on his shirts. Emily didn't blame him for his possible infidelity. Perhaps that was the inevitable end of their union. But last night's discovery had turned her entire perception of the man she'd shared a bed with upside down. Jason had rushed off to a meeting the day before, leaving his laptop unlocked. Not inherently curious, Emily still couldn't resist the temptation to check the command folder he'd so carefully guarded. What she discovered made her go cold. Documents, photographs, recordings of conversations, evidence of systemic blackmail of clients, manipulation of lawsuits, money laundering through shell companies. Jason was not just a successful lawyer, but a criminal using his position for personal enrichment. She was particularly struck by photos from a motel on the outskirts of a neighboring town. They showed Jason with other men, in situations that left no doubt about the nature of their encounters. Not adultery with a woman, as she'd assumed, but carefully concealed homosexuality. And to make matters worse, these same men had been involved in court cases her husband had prosecuted, and the outcome had always been in favor of Jason's clients. Yesterday, after copying the files to a thumb drive, she'd gone to lunch with Rachel Summers, her only close friend in town. Rachel, in her 33 years already a respected doctor at the local clinic, had been supportive of Emily since they'd met. She was the one who had helped with hormone therapy and had been there for her during the most difficult moments of her transgender transition. Lunch was held on the veranda of Rachel's home, a private place where they could talk openly. "I can't live like this anymore, Rach." Emily's voice shook as she set aside her cup of green tea. "I'm leaving him." Rachel looked at her friend carefully with her penetrating brown eyes. A mound of red curls framed her freckled face, making her look like the brave heroine of Scottish legends. "What happened? Did he threaten you?" Emily shook her head. No, it's not that. It's just, I found something. Something very serious. And no, I can't tell you what it is. She held up a hand to forestall her friend's question. The less you know, the safer it is for you. Rachel frowned. You're scaring me, Em. Is this something criminal? I've made all the arrangements. I'll leave at the end of the week when he's at the conference. Emily ignored the question. I'll go to your place first, then my cousin's in Portland, and from there, we'll see. What about your job? Living here? You're gonna give it all up? I was planning on moving anyway. Remember I told you about the program at the Oregon State Library? They accepted my application 2 weeks ago. Rachel looked at her friend with a mixture of dismay and admiration. Are you sure? After everything you've been through together? Emily grinned bitterly. What we went through was just an illusion, a masquerade. We each had our secrets, but his were unforgivable. Back home, Emily spent several hours composing a detailed letter. In it, she outlined everything she'd discovered, enclosed copies of the documents, and told her where to find the originals. Sealing the envelope, she wrote on it, Rachel Summers. Open only if necessary. This envelope she sent with a courier the same day, stating in the instructions to deliver it tomorrow morning. It was her insurance, her way of protecting herself. In the evening, Jason returned home earlier than usual. His mood seemed elevated, which alerted Emily. She had prepared his favorite meal, steak with mushroom sauce and potato gratin, and set the dining room table with the utmost care. Candles, the best wine, china dishes they only used on special occasions. Jason appreciated the effort, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. They ate in tense silence, occasionally exchanging insignificant phrases about the weather and city news. When Emily served dessert at tiramisu from the best pastry shop in town, Jason finally spoke of something substantial. I'm being promoted, he said, sipping his wine. I'll be in charge of all the important cases in the neighborhood. Congratulations, Emily tried to feign enthusiasm. It's a big step. Huge, he nodded, and very timely, especially considering the potential complications. Emily tensed. What complications are you talking about? Jason stared at her. She saw something new in his gaze, cold calculation and warning. The world is full of secrets, my dear. Everyone has something to hide. Some secrets are worth guarding especially carefully. Emily's heart sank. Are you referring to anything in particular? Your interest in my files, for instance. He cut off a piece of dessert and sent it leisurely into his mouth. You don't think I noticed, do you? The computer records all activity, sweetheart. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. I just happened to see an open file, that's all. I copied the whole folder. His voice remained calm, but there was steel in his eyes. You know what the funny thing is? I have copies too. Certain documents about you. Your past. Let's just say not everyone in Lakeview will be as sensitive to your, uniqueness as I am. Emily went cold. He was threatening to expose her transgenderism. In liberal Portland, that would be unpleasant but not disastrous. But in conservative Lakeview, such disclosure could mean ostracism, job loss, perhaps even physical danger. Are you blackmailing me? Her voice trailed off into a whisper. Jason shrugged. I'm suggesting mutual respect for each other's secrets. You keep my secrets, I keep yours. Fair enough, isn't it? Emily slowly put down her fork. What if I don't agree to those terms? Then we'll both have to face the consequences. He sipped more wine. But I'd rather avoid that. After all, we are family. The rest of the dinner passed in an oppressive silence. Emily mechanically cleared the table, loaded the dishwasher, and went up to the bedroom, citing a headache. Lying in the dark, she listened to Jason working in his office downstairs and thought about tomorrow, about the decision that needed to be made, about a life that would never be the same again. What she didn't know was that this was her last night in the house on Maple Street, Emily Harris's last day. The Lakeview Library opened at 9 a.m. sharp. Martha Jenkins, the elderly assistant librarian, arrived 15 minutes early as usual to turn on the computers and get the room ready for visitors. Emily always showed up at 8:55 with her usual cup of coffee from the Morning Light, a small coffee shop on the corner of Main Street. But today the clock read 9:15 and she was still gone. Martha dialed Emily's cell phone number. It buzzed, but no one answered. By 10 o'clock, the older woman's concern had turned to alarm. In the 3 years they'd worked together, Emily had never been more than 5 minutes late, and if she was sick, she'd always given advance notice. At 11, Martha called the library director, who advised her to contact Emily's husband. Jason Harris answered after the 4th ring. His voice sounded sleepy and a little irritated. "Yes, speaking." "Mr. Harris? This is Martha Jenkins from the library. I'm sorry to bother you, but Emily didn't show up for work today and we can't reach her." There's a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Harris? Can you hear me?" Yes, I'm sorry." His tone changed to one of concern. "I thought she was at work. I left early this morning. She was still asleep. I thought I'd see her tonight." "So she's home?" Martha asked cautiously. "Just a second, I'm going home in a couple of hours to get my papers. I'll find out and call you." Martha's phone rang a couple hours later. "She's not home." Jason's voice sounded really worried now. Her car was there, but she wasn't. Her purse, gone too. Maybe she walked somewhere? To a friend's house? Maybe. I heard doubt in her voice. "I'll call around and get back to you." But Jason didn't call back. Instead, he showed up at the Lakeview police station at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His usually immaculately styled hair was disheveled, his tie loose, and panic in his eyes. The officer on duty escorted him to Detective Melissa Clark's office. Melissa Clark was in her 15th year with the Lakeview Police Department. In that time, she'd seen everything from petty theft to brutal murders, but the small town rarely faced serious crime. In her 42 years, she was still the only female detective in the precinct, which made her something of a landmark. Short, with short graying hair and shrewd blue eyes, she had a reputation for not backing down until she got to the bottom of things. "Mr. Harris," Melissa pointed to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me more about your situation." Jason lowered himself into the chair, his hands shaking visibly. "My wife, Emily," he began in a hoarse voice. "She's missing. I saw her this morning when I left for work. She was still asleep. I didn't want to wake her. And when I came home to get my papers, I got a call from the library that she hadn't shown up for work. She was nowhere to be found." Melissa was nonchalantly jotting down information in her notebook. "What time did you leave the house?" 7:30, as usual. I had an important meeting in Riverdale at 9. "And you're sure your wife was home when you left?" "Positive. She was in our bed. He stopped talking, swallowed. "I even kissed her on the forehead before I left." Something in his tone made Melissa wary. Over the years, she'd developed an almost uncanny ability to sense when she was being lied to. Now that ability was literally screaming. "When was the last time you spoke to your wife?" "Last night. We had dinner, then I worked in my office and she went to bed. Said she had a headache." "How would you describe your relationship, Mr. Harris?" Jason tensed up. "Beautiful. We've been married 3.5 years. No major conflicts." "None?" Melissa raised an eyebrow. "All couples have disagreements." "Sure, little things have happened," he shrugged, "but nothing major." "Last night. Describe it in detail." Jason thought for a moment, as if searching for words. "Emily made dinner. My favorite steak. We talked about my promotion. She was happy for me, congratulating me. Did she seem tense? Concerned about something? Maybe a little quiet," he admitted reluctantly. "But I thought it was the headache." "Did you check to see if any of her things were missing? Clothes, Idaho?" "Just her purse. Everything else is still there. Even her favorite coat is hanging in the hallway." Melissa closed her notebook. "Mr. Harris, we'll take a missing persons report, but I must warn you, an adult has the right to leave without explanation. Unless there's evidence of a crime, our options are limited." "You don't understand." Jason sounded desperate. "Emily would never do that. Something's wrong. I can feel it." Melissa looked at him carefully. The Law Academy teaches you to control your emotions, and this man was almost shaking with excitement. "Sincerity or great acting?" "We'll send an officer to inspect your home. Standard procedure." Something akin to fear flashed across Jason's face, but he quickly controlled himself. "Sure, whatever it takes." An hour after Jason left, Rachel Summers showed up at the station. The red-headed woman looked just as worried as the missing woman's husband. "Detective Clark?" She fidgeted with her watch band. "I'm a friend of Emily Harris. I just got a call from Jason saying Emily was missing." Melissa motioned for her to sit down and tell her anything that might be helpful to the investigation. "We had lunch yesterday," Rachel began. Emily seemed scared. She said she was going to leave her husband. Melissa's eyebrows went up. "Leave? Why?" She wouldn't explain. She only said she'd discovered something serious, something I'd better not know about for my own safety. Was she afraid of her husband? Rachel hesitated. I don't think she was afraid of physical violence. More like the repercussions of what she'd learned. And what was that? I have no idea. She didn't say. Rachel fell silent, then added, "I had an envelope delivered from her this morning, sealed, with instructions to open only in case of emergency. I'm not sure that's the case right now." Melissa stepped forward. "Miss Summers, your friend is missing. Her husband claims they have the perfect marriage, and you say she was about to leave him. I'd say the need is palpable." Rachel hesitated. "You see, I feel like I'm betraying her trust. What if she just decided to take time out? Go away for a day or two to think? Without even bringing her coat?" Rachel sighed. "The envelope is in my car. I brought it just in case. Bring it over, please." Rachel returned shortly with a thick A4 envelope with a warning written in Emily's handwriting. Melissa examined it carefully without opening it. "I suggest a compromise," the detective said. "We don't open it now. We give Emily a chance to come forward. If we don't hear from her in 24 hours, we open the envelope in front of a police officer. Is that okay with you?" Rachel reluctantly agreed, and the envelope was placed in the safe in Melissa's office. Meanwhile, Officer Jones, sent to inspect the Harris home, made a disturbing discovery. In the bathroom, on the bottom of the shower curtain, he found traces of blood. An attempt to wash them off was obvious. Pinkish streaks were visible on the white fabric. A few more stains were found on the tiles in the corner of the bathroom, and on one of the towels hidden at the bottom of the dirty laundry basket. Melissa immediately went to the Harris house, where Jason was watching the forensics team work with a look of genuine amazement on his face. "Blood?" he questioned. "But that's impossible. Unless..." He hesitated. Emily had recently menstruated. Maybe that would explain the marks in the bathroom. Melissa looked at him skeptically. "Mr. Harris, the amount of blood and the attempt to cover it up makes us think of other scenarios. Where were you between 7:30 this morning and 2 o'clock this afternoon?" "In the office," he exclaimed indignantly. "I told you, I had an important meeting, then some paperwork. Dozens of people can attest to that." "We'll check," Melissa replied dryly. "In the meantime, I'm going to have to ask you not to leave town." Checking Jason's alibi proved more difficult than anticipated. The security cameras in the office did indeed record his arrival at 8:45 in the morning. He had held a meeting there, then worked in his office until the call from the library. Seemed like the perfect alibi. But Melissa Clark didn't believe in coincidences, especially when it came to someone with connections and resources. "Videotapes can be tampered with," she pointed out to her colleague, Detective Rodriguez. "And witnesses can lie, especially if they're subordinates." "Do you think he set up an alibi for himself and then went home and did something to his wife?" Rodriguez asked, shaking his head. "It's too complicated." "For the average person, yes. For a seasoned lawyer with questionable ethics, it might well be." The investigation took a new turn when forensics found a strange call on Emily's cell phone the night before she disappeared. The number belonged to Thomas Grant, Jason's partner at the law firm. Melissa decided to pay a visit to the office with no advance warning. She found Jason and Thomas Grant in the conference room, engaged in an intense conversation. Upon seeing the detective, both men flinched. Thomas Grant, an imposing man with gray hair on his temples and a razor-sharp mind, looked unusually pale. "Detective Clark," Jason pulled himself together quickly. "Have you heard from my wife?" "Not yet." Melissa shifted her gaze to Thomas. "Mr. Grant, could you explain why you called Emily Harris yesterday afternoon?" Thomas froze like a startled deer in headlights. "Yeah, I needed to confirm the details of the fundraiser." His voice shook. "Emily was helping with the library part of the program." "And what exactly did you talk about?" "About the books for the auction," he answered a little too quickly. "Nothing in particular." Melissa made a note in her notebook. "I'm surprised you didn't mention this conversation earlier, Mr. Harris." "Yeah, didn't think much of it." Jason tried to look nonchalant. but his fingers tapping nervously on the table gave away his tension. Melissa gave both men a careful look. Something wasn't right here. Something important connecting Emily, Jason, and Thomas. Something she didn't understand yet. "I'll keep you posted on the investigation," she said as she headed for the exit. "And I expect your full candor in the future." Blackborough Lake was an hour's drive from Lakeview. Surrounded by dense coniferous forest, it rarely attracted tourists. Too cold, too deep, with steep, rocky shores. The perfect place for those who wanted to hide something. The dark-clothed figure stood on the edge of the cliff, looking down to where the black water had swallowed everything that could be connected to what had happened. The events of the previous night flashed through her mind like the frames of a nightmare movie. The argument, which had begun with quiet accusations, had quickly turned into a furious confrontation. Emily, usually restrained, that night seemed to have changed into a different person. Fearless, determined, ready to go all the way. Then a movement, too fast, too sharp. Emily's hand flew up in a defensive gesture, but it was too late. The heavy marble statuette, grabbed in a fit of rage, came down on her head with terrifying force. The sound with which it hit the floor, deafening, final, still echoed in her ears. Panic. Blood, so much blood, spreading across the white tile of the bathroom. And then cold, calculating planning. A body, heavy and gutless, wrapped in a tarp. The night road to the lake, the load quickly going under the water. And now the emptiness, a ringing, deafening emptiness, and the realization that there is no turning back. No matter what happened next, life would never be the same again. The figure took a deep breath, soaked in the smell of pine trees and damp earth. It was time to go back, to play the part, to pretend nothing had happened, and hope the lake would keep its secret forever. The third day of the investigation began for Melissa Clark with a cup of strong black coffee without sugar, the only luxury she allowed herself during a difficult case. Gray folders of expert reports lined her desk, resembling a miniature metropolis. Lost among them was the envelope Rachel Summers had left behind, a silent reminder that time was running out, and with it the chances of finding Emily alive. Melissa opened the forensics report and froze as she stumbled upon some unexpected information. Among the prints found in the bathroom of the Harris house were those belonging to Thomas Grant. Melissa frowned. This was the first significant break in the case. Rachel walked into the station, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually bright red hair had faded and her eyes were red from crying and sleeplessness. "It's been over 24 hours, she said instead of greeting. "I'm ready to open the envelope." Melissa nodded. "Let's go into my office." Aye. They sat on opposite sides of the desk. Melissa took a sealed envelope out of the safe and handed it to Rachel. She stared at the inscription in Emily's neat handwriting for a few seconds, then tore the paper open with determination. Inside was a folder of documents and a sealed, smaller envelope marked, "Rachel, personally." Rachel set it aside and began to look through the documents. With each page turned, her face grew more and more tense. "Oh my God," she whispered, holding the folder out to Melissa. "Look at this." The documents were a meticulously assembled dossier on Jason Harris, financial statements with discrepancies, phone records, photos of Jason with clients in compromising situations, and most striking of all, pictures of Jason and Thomas Grant, clearly indicating an intimate relationship. "I can see why Grant's prints are in their house," Melissa murmured. "He's not just a business partner." Rachel opened the second envelope and began to read the letter. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Emily knew her life was in danger," she said, holding the letter out to Melissa. "She suspected Jason." The letter confirmed her worst fears. Emily discovered not only her husband's financial shenanigans, but that their marriage was just a cover for his relationship with Thomas. She was going to leave him and turn the evidence she'd gathered over to federal authorities. "I need to apprehend both of them," Melissa said firmly, rising. "Stay here, Miss Summers. You're only safe at the station." She immediately sent 2 officers after Jason and went to the law firm's office, where, according to the secretary, Thomas Grant was. Thomas was pacing nervously around his office when Melissa entered without knocking. When he saw the detective, he flinched and retreated to the window like a hunted animal. "Mr. Grant," Melissa began calmly. We need to talk about your fingerprints in the Harris house, especially in the bathroom where Emily's blood was found. The color drained from Thomas's face. He slumped in his chair as if his legs refused to hold him up. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "It was a terrible mistake." "What exactly was a mistake, Mr. Grant?" Helping him. Thomas looked up at her with a haggard expression. "Jason called me that night. He sounded distraught, panicked. Said something terrible had happened, that he needed my help. When I got there..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "When I arrived, Emily was already dead." Melissa turned on the recorder, read Thomas his rights, and asked him to repeat what he'd said for the record. The story he told was monstrous in its ordinariness. That night, after an argument with Emily, Jason had hit her over the head with a heavy statue. The blow had been fatal. In a panic, he had called Thomas, with whom they had more than just a business relationship. Thomas had helped wash the blood away. Jason then wrapped Emily in a tarp and left to get rid of the problem, while Thomas stayed behind to clean the bathroom. "Where did he take the body?" Melissa asked, demandingly. "To Black Boar Lake." Thomas lowered his eyes. "The northern shore. There's a steep slope and deep water. He said no one would ever find it." Melissa immediately contacted the station, requesting a dive team, and then, looking into Thomas's eyes, she asked the key question: why did he kill her? "She found out about us," Thomas answered simply, "and about his manipulations with his clients. Blackmail, tampering with evidence. Jason had spent years building his image as the perfect family man and lawyer, and she threatened to ruin it all." Thomas was arrested for accessory to a murder cover-up. By late afternoon, divers retrieved Emily's body from the dark waters of the lake. She was wrapped in a tarp and tied to a car tire, just as Thomas had described. Jason Harris refused to cooperate with police, demanding an attorney. But there was enough evidence. Thomas's testimony, documents found by Emily, autopsy materials confirming death by blunt force trauma, with a blunt object matching the shape of the ill-fated statue found in the house. That evening, Melissa Clark personally handcuffed Jason Harris's wrists as she read him the first-degree murder charges. The former successful attorney's face remained impassive, but there was a look of realization in his eyes. His perfectly constructed life had fallen apart. Jason's interrogation was conducted in the presence of an attorney. At first, he refused to speak, but when he was presented with Thomas's testimony and the documents Emily had found, his strategy changed. "You don't understand the position I'm in," he said, ignoring his defense attorney's warnings. "It's impossible to build a career in this town if you're different. Marriage to Emily was the perfect solution. She got the respectability, I got the cover. And then you started blackmailing clients?" Melissa was flipping through a folder of evidence. "Business is business," Jason shrugged. "It wasn't about Emily. She just had to play her role." "The role of the woman you never saw as a woman?" Melissa clarified, remembering the xenophobic comments in his correspondence. Jason's face contorted with disgust. "That man in women's clothing thought he was a moral judge, threatened to destroy everything I'd spent years building. And for what? For some twisted idea of authenticity? So you admit you killed her?" "I didn't plan it." Jason's eyes darkened at the memory. "I just wanted to shut her up. She laughed at my threats, said she wasn't afraid anymore, and I snapped." Jason Harris's trial began 3 months later and garnered national media attention. Double lives, blackmail, financial crimes. But the main thing was murder. The cold-blooded elimination of a man who dared to stand up to a powerful machine of lies. Thomas Grant received a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against a former partner. Jason Harris was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. It had been a year since Emily Harris had last crossed the threshold of her Maple Street home. Rachel Summers stood on a small stage at the Lakeview Community Center, in front of an audience of a few dozen people. Behind her back hung a banner that read, "Emily Harris Foundation. Be yourself." "We are here today to honor a woman who refused to live in fear." Rachel's voice was firm, though tears welled up in her eyes. Emily knew the value of authenticity. She fought not only for her right to be herself, but for justice in a world where lies and manipulation often won. Rachel looked around at the audience. Locals, activists from major cities, journalists. Among them, she noticed Detective Clark sitting in the last row. Our foundation was created to support transgender people in small towns, where acceptance and understanding are particularly elusive. We offer legal aid, medical support, safe housing for those who find themselves on the streets because of family rejection. But most importantly, we offer hope. Hope that one day, no one will have to pay with their life for the right to be themselves. A picture of Emily appeared on the screen behind her, smiling, full of life, with a book in her hands. A touching portrait of a woman who wasn't allowed to live her story to the fullest. After the ceremony, Melissa approached Rachel. "Wonderful speech," the detective said. "Emily would have been proud of you." "I'm just continuing what she started." Rachel smiled sadly. "You know, sometimes I think, what if I had insisted that she stay with me that night? What if we had opened the envelope sooner?" "Don't blame yourself," Melissa said softly. "You did the best you could, and you're doing it now." They walked outside into the cool fall evening. Lakeview was changing, slowly but surely. The local school had an anti-bullying committee. The library where Emily worked now held regular events about embracing diversity. And even the conservative local newspaper published a series of articles on gender identity, a clumsy but sincere attempt to make sense of a complex topic. "You know what's ironic?" Rachel said, looking up at the sunset sky. Jason was afraid that the truth about his sexual orientation would ruin his career. And after everything that had happened, the town began to think about its prejudices. The price had been Emily's life, but change was happening. Melissa nodded. In her 20 years on the force, she'd seen enough tragedies born of fear and hate. But in them, there was rarely room for the hope she felt around her now. Once a month, Rachel traveled to Blackborough Lake. She didn't go to the spot where Emily's body had been found, preferring the small clearing on the eastern shore, studded with wildflowers. Here she would picnic for one, telling her invisible friend about the foundation's work, the small victories and the inevitable difficulties. "You know, we got a grant to expand the program," she said, gazing out over the calm surface of the water. "We'll be able to expand to 3 more counties. That's a credit to you, Em. What you fought for lives on." And on the other side of the lake, hidden from view by the dense forest, stood a small memorial stone. Melissa Clark had erected it at her own expense, without publicity. On the stone was carved a simple inscription: "Emily Harris. The truth makes us free, even if the path to it is full of pain." Sometimes the detective would drive there, sit down beside it, and watch the dark water that took the life of a man she never knew personally, but whose story forever changed her idea of courage, of what it meant to stay true to yourself, and the price that sometimes must be paid for that loyalty.